Women are not just victims of conflict. They are agents of peace and agents of change. Consider what has happened recently in the Philippines. Mindanao, the second largest island in the Philippines, has been locked in a 40-year conflict. The Moro Islamic Liberation Front was battling the government. More than 120,000 lives were lost. Hope for peace was all but gone when two strong women, Teresita Quintas Deles and Miriam Coronel Ferrer, took over the negotiations. They made inclusivity their mantra, and thanks greatly to their efforts, finally a peace was brokered in a historic deal. This is what we call smart power, using every possible tool and partner to advance peace and security, leaving no one on the sidelines, showing respect even for one's enemies, trying to understand and, insofar as psychologically possible, empathize with their perspective and point of view, helping to define the problems, determine the solutions. That is what we believe in the 21st century will change the prospects for peace.
Well, that's not what I believe. What is this Red Grandma talking about? What enemies? And by the way, there has been a communist insurgency in the Philippines for decades. What about them? Or are they not enemies? Are the enemies that Hillary refers to those that ought to be brought in an inclusive way? The American right? Conservatives? Those that self-identify as non-communist? Is she talking about radical jihadists? Are we supposed to sit down and empathize with radical jihadists, with ISIS? I'm sorry, but I just don't see that any of these groups give a damn whether or not, Ms. Clinton, you empathize with them. I mean, what is this mush anyway? What do you think it is? Is this Hill's attempt to make the case for the first female president? I mean, she brings these two arcane Filipinas up that somehow brokered a peace. Why not make the case for the next communist leftist president? Turn left for Hillary. She will end the wars for good. We've heard this before. The enemies of liberty are far too organized. And too many of them don't care whether or not we empathize with them. Look at these barbarians and what's left of Iraq. A war that we won. People were voting for candidates in Iraq, something unheard of. I can tell you that Saddam's inner circle was a brutal group of men led by Saddam Hussein. They used plastic shredders against their political enemies. Those that they thought the least of, they'd put in feet first. Plastic shredders. You can imagine what that is. But back to Hillary and her comments. I mean, is this presidential? Can you imagine someone on the right or a Republican saying this? It hasn't happened yet, but it could. While Hill embraces the cause of ISIS and radical leftists, I have to assume she's talking about them. They simply want us dead. Our government and its founding principles transformed, and a free civil society that clings to the rule of law turned upside down. Does that sound familiar? I mean, where is she on the violence and the endless disruption resulting from the two cases of perpetrators dying while attacking the police or resisting arrest? You know, I tuned into the National Action Network this morning. They have a live show hosted by Al Sharpton. And he referred to Eric Garner's violation of the law for selling single untaxed cigarettes as employment. He actually called this man's violation of the law employment. And, you know, breaking the law may be a way to earn some extra income, but you have to consider the consequences. And that's when the police show up and attempt to arrest you. It's not a good idea to resist arrest. I don't care what color you are. And in the case of Eric Garner, his resisting arrest resulted in his death. Now, the officers, I guess, could have done more to ensure he was breathing after taking him down. And you have to understand the sergeant in charge of this action was a black female cop. So I just can't imagine that this somehow has anything to do with racial profiling and has more to do with taking down a perpetrator. Now, they didn't know his physical condition at the time. All they knew is that this was a large man, 300 pounds, very similar to the situation with Michael Brown in Ferguson. Now, maybe the officers were negligent by not checking Mr. Garner's health after the takedown. I mean, they had him subdued, and they didn't see if he was breathing. So perhaps there's something there. But nothing like the race baiters would have you believe. And I don't believe for a second that this incident in Ferguson involving the shooting of Michael Brown was a case of racial profiling. But, you know, Democrat politicians, the likes of Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, Louis Farrakhan, they seized on these incidents because it was a crisis. Ferguson had the elements of a crisis, at least the initial stories and impressions. You know, the unarmed kid bound for college, senselessly shot in the back by a white police officer while attempting to surrender with his hands up, just guilty of walking down the street while being black. These politicians, like our executive and his attorney general, they could not pass on a serious crisis like this. This should not be left to go to waste. It's an opportunity to do things you could not do before. Like, I don't know, nationalization of a police force. We've already militarized them. Why not nationalize them? And if that happens, my friends, you need to resist. You need to stand up. Because I don't think there's a police officer out there that believes that the police forces of the cities, the counties, and the states need to be nationalized. Not over this. This is not the time. But now what? We've got the presumptive Democrat nominee Hillary Clinton making the case for a female executive and thinks we should empathize with our enemies. Well, who exactly are the enemies? Are they the police? The county police? The city police? Is that who we're talking about? Is it the concept of local police forces? Is that the enemy, Ms. Clinton? What's she referring to? 904-222-TALK, 904-8255. You're welcome to weigh in on this, but as far as inclusivity is considered, which Ms. Clinton deems so important to the prospects for peace, why does the American left, of which she is a key figure, why does the left and their representative in the White House exclude Republicans from every major piece of legislation and consideration of executive orders, including the recent executive order ending deportations? By the way, apparently this has not been filed. There are reports that the executive order stopping deportations has not been filed. So what are we to make of that? And like it or not, you can self-identify and hyphenate your very origins from the beginning of time, but we're rapidly moving into a socialist slush that we may not survive as a constitutional republic. When I come back, I'd like to expose some of the left with the help of David Horowitz. You're listening to The Resistance, AM 600 and FM 100.3, The Answer. It's live. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. We'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
Hey, if you listen to talk radio, you can probably name some of the American left. I mean, many of its leaders, some of its activities. But if I showed you a book, a who's who of the American left, a black book of the American left, would you read it? If there was such a book that chronicled the anti-American activities since 9/11, and literally in prophetic terms laid out the losing of the war in Iraq, and I would argue Afghanistan as well, would you read it? And if you did, and you gained a better understanding of who these people are and the groups and organizations that make up the American left, would that change your tactics and move you to take action to help save this great nation? The Black Book of the American Left, Volume 3, The Great Betrayal, is the book. The author, David Horowitz, founder of Front Page Magazine, a self-described red diaper baby, one of the founders of the New Left in the 1960s, and editor of its largest magazine, Ramparts, now a conservative and a creator of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. David, welcome to the Resistance.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know, I met you in 2008. You don't remember me, but I remember you. You were standing out in front of one of the office buildings. I think it was the old congressional office building there in Washington, D.C., and it was just a fluke. I recognized you, introduced myself, but you know, for so many Americans, just grasping what the American left is and does is a daunting task. They conceal and protect their agenda like master illusionists. But your book, this book, really lays it bare.
Like cheap-faced liars. We have one in the White House. So I agree with you that for years, and the years that I was writing this book, or this series of books, it's going to be 10 volumes. It was difficult. They lie about their agendas. They claim to be peace activists when they're anti-American, anti-military, anti-American military activists. But with the and I was frustrated for many years writing these articles because conservatives were always just too nice, giving leftists the benefit of the doubt. But I think people's eyes have been opened during these Obama years. So, for example, these lynch mob racists in the streets now over Ferguson and the incident in New York, I think most Americans understand that's what they are. They see they're defending criminals, and they're not, the vast majority of Americans are no longer fooled by this. But you're right, there was a long time when their deceptions seem very clever and masterful. But now, Obama lies every time he opens his mouth. He's pathetic.
It is. It's terrible. And we have...
he said, I think that we have 24 occasions on video where he said that it's illegal. He can't amnesty illegal aliens who forced their way into this country because the Constitution won't let him. And then he goes ahead and does it.
It is truly amazing.
Everything they said about Obamacare is a lie.
Yeah.
You can't keep your doctor. You can't keep your plan. It is a tax. It's not going to lower your costs by $2,500 a year. It's going to raise them.
Yeah, closer to $5,000.
And on and on.
Yeah. If you use the insurance, remember you've got a huge deductible in there too. When did you say to yourself, David?
It's devastating to American freedom. If Obamacare, if they succeed if the Republicans don't remove Obamacare, Americans have lost their control over their own health. Now, that's a pretty serious loss of freedom.
And they also know about your health. They know everything about you at that point because of the medical records. The motto of my website, Front Page Mag or frontpagemagazine.com, is inside every liberal is a totalitarian screaming to get out. Yes, that's it.
And that's because they think they know what's good for you, and they're prepared to lie, cheat, steal, and do anything else necessary to force you to do what they think is good for you.
The ends justify the means. Now, in fairness, you were a communist at one point. And when
my parents were communists. I was a new leftist. I thought there was a new left that wasn't going to do the same things as the communist left.
Well, what would the new left be
wrong.
doing, David?
And so eventually I left the left. The left is now in power, that left, the communist left. Nobody uses that word. It's kind of archaic, but Obama was come from the same background I did. He was raised by communists. He then went into what I would call neo-communist movement, the veterans of the 60s, and never left it.
What's so attractive to these people,
though? The throne. She has a similar background, Iranian communist family she comes from. Neither of them have ever left the left. So we have a communist left in power that's intent on, first of all, destroying the two-party system. Dick Morris has a book out about that, but I think it's pretty obvious. That's what the IRS scandal, which Obama is behind, is about. That's what the defense of voter fraud is about.
And when you woke up, I mean, the new left, what was the new left? Because we've got the communist left now, and they are fully in charge.
Well, the new left were children of communists. That's mainly who we were, who wanted to get away from the taint of Stalin and pretend that we weren't going to do the same thing. So it had, all kinds of. Well, the communist left. My mother was a Democrat. My parents never referred to themselves as communists, nor did any of their communist friends. Always they were progressives. But the new left, which was very brief, it was for a few years in the 60s, we were revolutionaries and proud of it. We want a revolution and we want it now with a slogan, and so forth. I guess I was part of that. Burn the system down. But a man named Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals, in which he said this is a foolish way to go about things. You have to infiltrate, not fight the Democratic Party, but infiltrate it and become the Democratic Party. And that's what's happened.
So the Democrat Party is...
The anti-American left is the Democratic Party today.
And in your book, this is volume 3, there are going to be 10 volumes. And this was written over a long period of time because each of these is articles that you published.
Right. It goes from about the first World Trade Center bombing, which Clinton never visited the site and pretended it was a criminal act when it was an act of war.
Yes.
Through the death of Osama bin Laden. And The Great Betrayal, which is this volume that's just come out, is about the greatest betrayal of America and its history by the Democratic Party, by Eddie Baker Party. With a civil war accepted, you can see that as another Democratic betrayal. But it focuses on the Iraq War because the Iraq War was a vital war in the war on the so-called War on Terror. Saddam Hussein was a monster who had killed 300,000 of his own people and dropped poison gas on the Kurds, had massive nuclear and chemical weapons programs, and started 2 wars of aggression which killed 1 million people. The second one was the Gulf War, which the United States won in 4 days in 1991. There was never a peace. There was a truce secured by 3 UN Security Council resolutions, which eventually became 16 because Saddam Hussein kept violating the truce. And that is, we were able to destroy his nuclear program, but he was hiding chemical and biological weapons. And, of course, the Democrats were saying he wasn't. After the war started, they said that. So Bill Clinton signed the Iraqi Liberation Act in 1998 and fired 450 cruise missiles into Iraq, but sent no troops because Democrats don't normally.
They don't do boots on the ground.
No, they don't. Yeah, right. So it was a gesture, actually. It was to distract from the Monica Lewinsky scandal. But when Bush got into office and he saw what did 9/11 show us? It showed us that an incredibly poor and backward country like Afghanistan, by giving a safe haven to terrorists, could wind up killing it. Fortunately, although tragically, it killed only 3,000 people, but the aim was to kill 200,000 people.
Right.
So Bush rightly tried to rein in Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi regime. And when Clinton fired those missiles, Saddam Hussein expelled the UN weapons inspectors who were there to,
chronicle his attempt to get
his chemical
nuclear
weapons
weapons.
storage facilities.
Right.
Well, that's when he put the inspectors back in, but he didn't let them go wherever they wanted. Now, why did we go to war? Because you can't. Why did he let the weapons inspectors in? Because Bush put 200,000 troops on his border. Now, you can't keep 200,000 troops on the Iraqi border indefinitely, and you can't let a rogue dictator thumb his nose when you give him an ultimatum. And UN Security Council Resolution 17 was an ultimatum, which was destroy your weapons of mass destruction and prove you've done it or else. And they gave him a month, and the deadline passed, and he thumbed his nose at the ultimatum. Now, you can't draw a line in the sand or a red line in the sand and then not back it up. Because if you do that, people never take you seriously anymore.
David, we got to take a short break.
A rogue dictator, aggressor testing you, you can't threaten him and hold him back because your threat is meaningless. Like Obama's threats are meaningless.
David, I want to hold you over just for this short break, and we'll get back into your book right after we return. Can you stay through for one more segment? Okay.
No, we got to get to the punchlines.
Yes, absolutely. AM 600, FM 100.3, The Resistance. We'll be right back with David Horowitz. The book, The Black Book of the American Left. We'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here is Forrest.
And we're back with David Horowitz. The Black Book of the American Left, Volume 3, The Great Betrayal is the book. Excellent book. David, in your book, you lay out how the Democrats supported the war on terror before they were against the war on terror, after it was, arguably won. Was that the plan all along?
They supported it reluctantly, although John Kerry and Hillary Clinton and Al Gore gave eloquent speeches as to why Saddam Hussein had to be taken down by any means necessary. 3 months into the war, however, they turned against it. And they didn't just turn against it, but they conducted a scorched earth campaign worthy of the enemy, calling, while our young men and women were in Baghdad fighting terrorists, they said that Bush lied, people died, that the war was a fake, that the war was, in Al Gore's words, immoral, illegal, and unnecessary. In other words, we were war criminals. We were aggressors without cause. These were horrifying charges to make, and there was so much other agitation by the left and supported by Democrats. There were 3 major national security programs destroyed because information was leaked and then printed on the front pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post, even though the White House begged them not to do it. And once you reveal a secret national security program, it's destroyed because the enemy changes his methods of operation. Why did they do this? Why did they turn? Why did they call Bush a liar? If you read psychological warfare manuals, the first thing that you're supposed to do is to attack the moral character of the commander of the opposing forces. Well, that was Bush. And this wasn't these, nutty radicals that are now in the streets over Ferguson we're talking about. These were Democratic Party leaders. And when they said Bush lied, they were lying. Bush couldn't have lied about the intelligence that justified the war, because John Kerry and other Democrats sat on the intelligence committees. Kerry was a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. All he had to do, if he had questioned Bush's information, what Bush was saying about the evidence for going into Iraq, was to pick up the phone, call George Tenet, who was the head of the CIA, and a Bill Clinton appointee was a Democrat. But Kerry didn't do that, because that wasn't the reason. They didn't turn against the war because they suddenly discovered Bush was a liar. They turned against the war because in that very spring there was a Democratic presidential primary and an anti-war radical from the 60s. And anti-war means anti-America's wars. Dean is not a pacifist. But Howard Dean was running away with the Democratic Party nomination. He was getting 45% to Kerry's 15%. That's when Kerry switched, and that was the reason he switched. And the reason they attacked Bush so viciously and said he was a liar was because they couldn't admit the truth. The truth is so sordid and wretched that for political gain, they betrayed they stabbed the troops in the field in the back, getting them killed, encouraging the enemy, weakening the support for these young people in harm's way, painting America black in front of the whole international community. They couldn't admit that they did that, first to win a primary nomination and then to try to win the presidency, which fortunately they didn't in 2004. So this is a disgraceful moment in American history and should make people wary of.
David, are you still there? It sounds like we might have lost you. Well, we try to get David back, yes. The book lays out how the Democrats supported the war on terror before they switched, as he was alluding to, in the hopes that the United States would lose, which ultimately they did. While we try to get him back on the line, David writes further in an essay titled The Party of Sabotage on page 163, and this is one of the things that struck me about David's book. Since the left's war with America is permanent, progressives have now turned their efforts to undermining the occupation of Iraq and the post-war peace, specifically America's efforts to reshape the Middle East and make it less of a safe harbor for our terrorist foes. Now, that was George Bush's desire, and I believe he was noble in that cause, and I think he did the country a great service. However, as we can see what's happening in Iraq today with the rise of ISIS in this caliphate, we have lost the war in Iraq. And hopefully we can get David back. But the book is great. It's called, okay, let's pull him back in. David, I'm sorry.
Betrayal, and I'm here.
We lost you
Where
there.
did I drop off?
when the NSA decided you'd said enough.
Probably.
But no, you dropped off right at the point where we were talking about Dean and that whole turn by John
Howard
Kerry.
Dean was running away with the nomination, and that's why the Democrats flipped 180 degrees with the honorable exceptions of Joe Lieberman and Dick Gephardt. Lieberman was then expelled from the party, and Dick Gephardt retired. But the rest of the party went into an attack mode that is prescribed by psychological warfare manuals. But their attack was against their own country and the young men and women they had sent into harm's way. So this is the worst moment in modern American history, as far as I'm concerned. But Republicans, people don't understand this, and of course, Democratic voters don't understand this because Republicans didn't fight back. They were silent. The lies. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Oh, yes, there were, and ISIS keeps discovering them. As in the last month, they discovered 2,200 rockets filled with sarin gas a poisonous biological agent or maybe it's a chemical agent, I don't know. But
it doesn't require much
killer
to kill someone.
Yeah. None of the news stories, all the news stories on this, the discovery of the chemical weapons plant, said, oh, it's dangerous in the hands of ISIS, or they're degraded now. It's 10 years later. None of them said the Democratic Party lied when they said that Bush lied about weapons of mass destruction. But Rove knew they were there, and so did Condoleezza Rice, and so did Stephen Hadley, and they covered it up. So Republicans have a certain accountability here and responsibility for the mess. So what the Democrats have been able to do as a result is turn a very good war into a bad war.
And then
after
ultimately,
all, we beat the terrorists in Iraq.
Yes.
Until Obama turned Iraq over to the terrorists in Iran. But they turned their own treason into patriotism. And that's why Republicans won't mention, they don't talk about national security hardly anymore, because they've been tarred and feathered. But the Democrats are really good at political warfare. So is the nutty left out in the streets. I mean, here's a bunch of anti-white racists is what they are, pro-criminal, and a white person like Darren Wilson, the officer in Ferguson, is guilty before the fact because he's white. Before any facts are in, he's guilty. Hang him. Or we're going to burn down your town. That's what that lynch mob said, although I think I'm the only person I know, certainly the only public figure who's calling it a lynch mob, which is what it is. And black people are innocent even after the facts are in. Michael Brown was a thug. He was a criminal, had a criminal mentality. He attacked an armed police officer in his car and tried to seize his gun, and he got himself killed as a result. The schools I think it's in St. Louis, are holding memorials for the criminal.
Well,
it's unreal. And this lynch mob is led by the President of the United States and his Attorney General. Barack Obama is a racist. How do you know that? Well, the first way you know it is that his chief advisor on race relations is one of the most notorious racists in the country, but he gets a pass because he's black, Al Sharpton.
Yes.
And Obama gets the pass because he's black. Actually, I've written an article, which is in Front Page Magazine, and a pamphlet called Black Skin Privilege. I mean, for crying out tears, it's time this country got past this nonsense and repudiated these people and called them by their right name. They're racist. The Democratic Party is a racist party. It controls every inner city in America of any size: Chicago, Harlem, South Central, St. Louis, Philadelphia. 100% controlled by Democrats and have been for whatever it is, 50 or 100 years. Everything that's wrong with the inner city, everything that oppresses blacks and Hispanics, Democrats are responsible for.
And
no Republican has the cojones to call them racist. And, you know, they trap these kids in public schools that don't teach them year in and year out and won't let them have scholarships called vouchers. They fight to the wall to oppose them, but they send their own kids to private schools. How racist is that?
It's terrible.
But where's the Republican who has the courage to say that?
Well, there's a few. I'm still in the Republican Party, but I'm getting closer and closer to the fringe.
Republican because the Democratic Party is a treasonous party.
Well, they're a lawless party, and
they're a lawless party.
Yes,
and they've destroyed our southern border, so terrorists can come in carrying Ebola virus or whatever else they have. Come on.
Well, I'm in hopes that we're waking up. I'm in hopes that the American public is waking up, and your work is going to go a long way towards waking them up. I tell you, I've read your book, and I really enjoyed it, The Black Book of the American Left, Volume 3, The Great Betrayal. And David, you know, to your point on Al Sharpton, I was watching his network this morning, the National Action Network, and here's a live show, and he's referring to Eric Garner's lawlessness, the selling of untaxed cigarettes, as employment. He literally called Eric Garner's
Well, of course,
employment.
Of course. I mean, this guy was arrested 31 times. The sergeant on the scene in running this operation was an African-American female.
Yeah.
He didn't die from the chokehold. First of all, I can't breathe. If you can say I can't breathe, you can breathe. And every person who resists arrest and is taken down is screaming complaints like that. Second of all, he didn't die on the street. He didn't die from being choked. He died in the ambulance because he was a sick man. He had diabetes. He had heart disease. He had high blood pressure. Why was he resisting arrest? They never asked these questions, and they don't care. They don't care about the facts because for them the facts are slavery.
And
that's the fact.
That's right.
The fact of slavery, people, is that it's white Christians who ended slavery. For 3,000 years, slavery was a normal part of society, and nobody said it was immoral until Wilberforce came along and said it was immoral. And it's the United States and Britain that ended slavery, for crying out tears.
And it still goes on today. And where does it go on?
There are 26 million slaves, and they're in Africa, and they're in Asia, man. There are probably some in the United States.
No doubt. The Black Book of the American Left, Mr. David Horowitz. I thank you so much for your time on a Saturday. I hope you'll come back. A pleasure. We'll be right back. I want to get some comments from K. Carl Smith, founder of the Frederick Douglass Republicans, on these incidents in Ferguson and New York City. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Resistance, AM 600, FM 100.3. Forrest Wilson, The Answer.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
Hey, it's Forrest Wilson. So I'm listening to Al Sharpton this morning, and he's referring to Eric Garner's employment, the illegal selling of untaxed cigarettes. They call them onesies, I believe. And he's talking about the lawlessness of Eric Garner, and he refers to it as Mr. Garner's employment. I want to get some perspective on this and bring in K. Carl Smith, founder of the Frederick Douglass Republicans. K. Carl, how are you?
Hey, Forrest, I'm doing great. Thank you for allowing me to be on your show once again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you. And we've got this situation in Ferguson, New York City, and now it's literally these protests are spreading across the country. I know in some of the local schools here, they've got the T-shirts with the hands up and I can't breathe. What do you make of all this?
Well, they have the right to protest, but just because you have the right to protest, that don't mean you're entitled to be violent. So I hope they stay away from the violence, unlike they did in Ferguson. But
it seems that the basis of these protests is lies from the Democrat left. Would you agree with that?
Well, the Democrats, they are the masters of deceit and the wizards of propaganda. One of the best examples how the Democrat Party lies, they lie about their own history. When you get a chance for us, go to the Democrat Party's website. It's democrats.org. And go at the top is the About link. When you hit the About link, there's a sublink that says History or Our History. On their website, they have this quote, and it says, I'm quoting, "For more than 200 years, our party has led the fight for civil rights." So that's a perfect example of how they lie, and they do it for a reason. They do it. It's a mind control technique that was perfected and performed by Adolf Hitler. In Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, that I read one time, he wrote back in 1952, Hitler said that what you have to do to control the masses, you got to. He said he talks about using a lie that's so colossal that no one would think that someone had the boldness to distort the truth. That's what they're doing.
The Democrats have had little to do with civil rights.
Very little. And that's why Douglass is important, because Douglass was alive during this 200-year span they're talking about. Because 200 years ago was 1814. Douglass was born in 1818, died 1895. In 1853, I believe it was, Douglass gave a speech called the Slavery Party. And Douglas said, he said, the best example of slavery in politics is the Democrat Party. So somebody is not telling the truth. And the reason why the Democrat Party are lying about their history, they're controlling the mind of the masses, because if you repeat a lie long enough and often enough, people will believe it, and that's a propaganda technique that Adolf Hitler developed.
And, you know, you see it at weddings. If you play bad music long enough, what happens? People start dancing. I mean, there's not a lot of difference between telling a lie and playing bad music. But in all seriousness, how do we reach the American public? Because this isn't just black people. There are a lot of white people in these protests and joining this quote-unquote movement, if you can call it that. And it seems to me that the end game is a nationalization of the police force. Now, I don't know if that's been talked about or written about very much, but we've already militarized them. I mean, if you look at a lot of police forces, they've got some of the old military hardware from the various wars that we've been fighting against Islamic extremists. But what's your perspective on where this is going, and how do we reach people? How do we stop this nonsense?
Well, I think one thing I want to bring up, how do we get to this point? As I took a look at, studying the situation in Ferguson, I think what led to this whole thing to begin with was a lack of mutual respect between the officer and Michael Brown. As I understand, the facts are Michael Brown, he's in the middle of the street, police officer drives up, says, "Get your ass out of the street." Well, there should be some professional conduct. He should have said something like, "Gentlemen or fellas, you need to get out of the street." So by using profanity, that's a challenge in some cases. And so, let me put it this way. When I grew up in Alabama, and my dad did something wise. He sat down with me one day when I was like 13, 14 years old. He said, "Son, you need to understand the culture we live in this country. It has a tendency to be racist. When you are here, and you're out here away from home, if you're stopped by a policeman, you cooperate because you don't have the upper hand." And it happened, that advice he gave me was so on key, because when I was in high school, I was stopped twice by policemen for suspicious reasons. I was never arrested. They thought I was doing something wrong, and they stopped me. Because when I was in high school, I had a car. It was a 64 Bel Air, and the radio didn't work. So in the back of my car, in the back seat, I had a boom box so I can play my cassettes and have some music in the car. And so one night, a friend of mine went to eat pizza. This was on a Friday night. It was like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And on the way back home, I said, "Hey, there's a BMW car lot. They're selling BMW. Let's go look at some cars." This is at night. So we parked. Went inside this, looking at cars, because people do it all the time. So when we got out the car, my friend grabbed the boom box so we can walk and hear some music, and it's just being kids. Well, when we went back to the car, 5 to 6 police officers pulled from their cars, lights on us, guns pulled, "Get your hands to the car." And I'm saying to myself, what do we do? And so I know my dad said, I cooperate, put my hands on the car. Harold, my friend, did not cooperate. He got loud with them, telling them, what are y'all doing to us? We hadn't done anything. He just kept getting loud. Bottom line with Harold, he got his butt spanked that night by the police.
Well, you did grow up in a Democrat-controlled state by none other than George Wallace. So some of that's understandable. This is a Democrat Party at work, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I would say this: there is no perfect political party. And racism has no political face at all. When you go back and look at what happened in 1964, the Republican Party both political parties has done some kind of dirt to black folks. But the Democrat Party has a longer history and a more brutal and vicious history of oppression.
Okay, Carl, we're going to have to leave it there, but I want to have you back and delve into this. I sure do appreciate you coming on today and giving your perspective. AM 600, FM 100.3, The Resistance. K. Carl Smith, I hope you visit his website. Give it to us one time real quick, K. Carl.
FrederickDouglassRepublican.org.
We shall continue this. Thank you again. AM 600, FM 100.3, The Resistance.